This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Hannah Viviers in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. Pressure on Sudan's military increases as international aid is suspended and protests continue. And China's foreign minister meets with his Serbian counterpart on a diplomatic tour of Europe. Well, the World Bank has halted all its financial operations in Sudan. This follows a military seizure of power from the transitional government on Monday. State oil company workers, doctors, and pilots have since joined civilian groups opposing the takeover. Thousands of people have taken to streets since the coup led by Armed Forces Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. But the World Bank's decision to pause payments and stop processing new operations is now a setback for plans to rebuild Sudan. The country had been isolated from the international financial system during the 3 decades of Omar al-Bashir's rule. Sudan had achieved full re-engagement with the World Bank in March and gained access to $2 billion in financing. Well, CGTN's Naba Mukhideen is in Khartoum and joins us now for the latest. Hi, Naba. What is the latest on the security situation in Khartoum?
Hi. In Khartoum, tensions is rising. Tension is rising, and a sense of lawlessness and insecurity among Khartoum residents and also other Sudanese states, not only in Khartoum. There is some news about new arrests and detentions among protesters and political opponents. There is also limited deployment of military troops in Khartoum streets. The military is trying to open the streets and get back life to normal, and by opening also the bridges and some hospitals. But people still fear the situation and not leaving to their businesses or leaving their houses and neighborhoods. The streets are still blocked by barricades. So yes, the security situation is still fragile.
Naba, is Sudan's main international airport in operation? There are reports that the head of Sudan's Civil Aviation Authority had been fired. What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, he has been fired and replaced by a new director because of the strike. The airport opened yesterday, and people expected some travelers, some flights will resume, but the workers in the airport strike, and the director himself, he was in a strike, and they called for a civil disobedience. They joined the call. The protesters called to join the comprehensive civil disobedience. So now he's fired and replaced by a new director, but still the workers are striking and the operations are stopped and suspended.
Naba, thank you so much for all that. Naba Mukhideen speaking to us from Khartoum in Sudan. Well, meanwhile, world leaders on Wednesday denounced a military takeover in Sudan. The United Nations Security Council met for a second day to discuss the developments, with officials warning the unrest could spill beyond Sudan's borders.
Tragic event unfolding in Sudan following the unconstitutional change of government reflect the shaky transitions that many countries in the region are going through. It will be therefore critical to urgently restore the constitutional order in Sudan, consistent with the Constitutional Declaration as well as the Juba Peace Agreement.
Well, Iran is urging the Taliban to form a government that is more inclusive. Tehran hosted a meeting on Wednesday, bringing together Afghanistan's 5 neighbors as well as Russia to discuss the best way forward for the region. Russia called on participants to shut out NATO and the U.S. forces to prevent a further destabilization. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi called for international dialogue and assistance. The Taliban were not invited to take part in the talks. Well, CGTN's Marilai Abbasin is in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, and joins us now for more. Hi, Marilai. What has the reaction been from the Taliban's Marilai to the call by Iran to form a government that is more inclusive?
Hello. Well, that Meeting is important, according to the Taliban spokesperson and acting Minister for Information and Culture, Zabihullah Mujahid. He added that such meetings can help pave the way for better relationship between Afghanistan, Iran, and the 5 other nations in neighboring countries of Afghanistan. Urgent Taliban that they should maintain friendly relationship with the neighboring countries and also form an inclusive government in the country, as the acting government in Afghanistan and the officials, particularly Zabihullah Mujahid, stress out that they haven't been invited to the meeting, but they can assure the neighboring countries that Afghanistan will have positive and friendly relationship with all the countries, particularly with the neighboring countries. He also added that they expect affirmative and positive outcome out of the Tehran conference between the foreign ministers of the 6 nations, and that's why, according to the current government in Afghanistan, they assure the neighboring countries that Afghan soil won't be used. In particular, the neighboring countries, Iran, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, China, and others. That's why they stress to hold such meetings. But the question why the Taliban weren't invited to this meeting is something unsolved. But I was talking with some experts, and they say these countries are still concerned about the situation in Afghanistan, and they want to build a trust with the current government formed by the Taliban since last 2 months. That's why they will be holding such meeting. It was the second meeting, and such meetings will obviously will continue in the future.
Zmaralai, thank you so much for all that. Zmaralai Abbasan speaking to us from Afghanistan's Kabul. Iran says it has agreed to resume talks by the end of November aimed at reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. Representatives from the European Union and Tehran met in Brussels on Wednesday. Ehsan Kevani has more from the Iranian capital.
Deputy Foreign Minister and the new top nuclear negotiator Ali Bagheri Kani met with the European Union's Deputy Secretary General Enrique Mora at the UN headquarters in Brussels. At the end of his meeting, Bagheri said that Vienna talks would resume by the end of November. It means that Iran has something like 1 month to officially re-enter the negotiations. This is something the EU and Washington were really worried about, because Iran was not ready to set a certain date for resumption of talks for saving the JCPOA, but there are still key issues that have not been settled after 6 rounds of talks in Vienna during a former administration of Iran. Iran's top diplomat says it is crucial for Raisi's administration to receive a guarantee from the world powers that unilateral withdrawal would not happen again. Foreign Minister Amir Abdullahian also said yesterday that Iran would not be happy if all the parties, including Washington, just return to the negotiations. He said what matters for Tehran is that sanctions related to the JCPOA would be lifted completely. According to him, Iran accepts the negotiations format in Vienna, but Tehran would not re-enter the Vienna talks from the deadlock point. Iran's new administration has said several times that the new round of talks in Vienna must have tangible results for Tehran economically, and it wants all the sanctions be lifted before Tehran returns to compliance with the deal and gets back to previous enrichment levels. Meanwhile, Raisi administration says it will not tie the country's economy to the results of the negotiations over the revival of the nuclear deal.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is in Serbia, the second stop on his European tour. Talks have been focused on the pandemic and infrastructure. Ajos Makanovich has the latest from Belgrade.
This is the third high-profile visit of Chinese dignitaries to Serbia in the last 12 months. It shows how important Serbia is for China and vice versa. There are both political and economic reasons for good relations between the two countries. The first European factory that will produce the Chinese Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccine is being built in Serbia. The high-speed railway construction from Belgrade to Budapest, mostly built and financed by the Chinese companies and banks, is in full swing. A few weeks from now, a joint project between China and France is expected to start on the construction of a metro in the Serbian capital Belgrade. In the political arena, the two countries strongly support each other. Serbia stands firmly behind the One China policy, while China supports the territorial integrity of Serbia, a crucial issue of the Serbian breakaway province of Kosovo and Metohija. So there are a lot of topics on the agenda during Wang Yi's two-day visit to Serbia. On Thursday, he'll attend the signing of an agreement between the Chinese and Serbian foreign ministries. After meeting with Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, he'll attend a ceremony where the local authorities will issue a building permit for the Belgrade to Hungarian border high-speed railway. After Serbia, the Chinese foreign minister will travel to Albania for the third leg of his European tour. Aljoša Milenković, CGTN, Belgrade.
Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. Naba Muhyiddin in Khartoum and Filihaza in Abuja are standing by with the latest news from the continent coming up next on Africa Live. Please stay tuned.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 48 hours, the rain.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Sudan army sacks 6 envoys as coup condemnation grows. Mali expels ECOWAS envoy from the country. And Egyptian Senate passes new law regulating biological resources usage. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines. In business, South Africa's Eskom, Exxaro, and Cerruti collaborate on renewable energy projects. And in sport, Namibia makes history with victory over Scotland at the T20 Cricket World Cup. Well, we continue with our coverage on the situation in Sudan, where envoys from France, Germany, Norway, the UK, the US, the EU, and the UN have met with Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok at his residence in Khartoum. The envoys say they found Hamdok in good health. The Prime Minister is under house arrest following a military coup on Monday. The United Nations has called for a return to the transition process and the immediate release of all those arbitrarily detained. Meanwhile, Sudan's Armed Forces Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has sacked 6 ambassadors, including those from the US, France, and the EU, after they condemned the military's takeover of government. International pressure against this week's coup is growing. Security forces have tightened their crackdown on pro-democracy protesters. We're now joined on the phone by CGTN's Naba Mukhidin, who is in Khartoum, and Amira Sayed, political analyst, Egyptian Gazette, based in Cairo. Hi again, Naba. Thank you, first of all, to both of you for being on the program. Hi again, Naba. Let's begin with you. Parallel diplomatic meetings seem to be going on in the capital, Khartoum. We've heard about the military government meeting Saudi diplomats and the Prime Minister meeting Western envoys. What more can you tell us about this?
General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan have met the Saudi Arabia ambassador yesterday in his office to discuss about the recent developments of the political crisis. And the ambassador expressed his country's interest in solving this political crisis and the growing tension between the counterparts. And while Hamdok have met some of the U.S. and AU and some of EU envoys in his house, but he didn't make any statement or comment about that. But due to the Ministry of Information, they said that the Prime Minister is calling on the protesters to make peaceful protests and peaceful and civilian means of protesting, and called on the protesters to take their way to take their way for democracy, and call for just peaceful protests. This is due to the Minister of Information. But the Prime Minister himself, he didn't make any comment after meeting the U.S. and EU envoys. And he also, there is some news that he received some phone calls from Blinken talking about the current political situation. And there is also some news about an awaited discussions, an awaited roundtable to solve this rising political crisis between the military generals and civilian leaders.
Now, but what is the latest on the reported firing of several Sudanese diplomats accredited to key countries, including the U.S. and the UN?
Yes, actually, 12 ambassadors condemned what's so-called a military takeover, and they said they will never hand over the embassies to any new ambassadors appointed by the coup authorities, due to what they said. There is some news that 6 ambassadors were fired, including Washington ambassador, Paris ambassador, Geneva, Belgium, and Qatar. Right now, the new appointed ambassadors, the names were not really revealed, but the 12 ambassadors who condemned the takeover, they said they will not hand over the embassies. So it's a diplomatic crisis among this political crisis going in Sudan.
Now, but what is the security situation across the country, especially in Khartoum, where you are ahead of the planned opposition protests, which we're being told could be held on Saturday?
The streets are still blocked by barricades, despite the security forces trying to remove it and opening the bridges and opening some hospitals and getting life to normal. But it's still the barricades are there. Protesters are protesting in the streets and making night protests to promote for Saturday 1 million person march due to what they said. The HPA, which is the body, the umbrella body that joins some unions like doctor unions, pharmacists, pilots unions, are calling more bodies to join the strike and the civil disobedience. Right now, the security situation in Sudan is still fragile. The military and security and intelligence, all of the uniformed forces are trying to remove barricades. There is some news that there is new arrests among the political opponents, including some ministers and including some members of empowerment committee, which was resolved by the military general Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. There is news about arrests among protesters, among activists. People now are fearing the security situation, and life is not normal yet in Khartoum.
Thank you so much for all that, Naba. Naba Muhyiddin, she was speaking to us from Khartoum. Let's bring in Amira Sayed, who's a political analyst at the Egyptian Gazette based in Cairo. Hi, Amira. Let's bring you into this conversation. It appears that Sudan's military government is reaching out to Saudi Arabia. What assistance can that country offer Sudan?
So actually, the Sudanese military and civilian leaders, they were like, they have been in a fragile power sharing agreement that was signed in 2019. So after the recent military coup that has received many negative reactions and international condemnations, the Arab countries, they are trying to avoid escalation. If we go through the press statements released by foreign affairs ministers in, for example, in Egypt, Egypt stressed that it follows up the recent development with concern and also said that the national security of Sudan is part and parcel of the Egyptian national security. Bahrain also called for self-control and avoid escalation. Jordan, they said that we have to raise the national interest above the personal interest. Regarding Saudi Arabia in particular, actually Saudi Arabia, it has like close ties with Sudan before this military coup. For example, Saudi Arabia tried to remove Sudan from the list of terror countries. It also played a vital role in decreasing the deaths over Sudan in order to like breathe new life into the Sudanese economy. So Saudi Arabia is trying to bring stability and to make the calm back to Sudan, especially that the economic consequences of such military coup, it will put the Sudanese economy in dire straits. Recently, we have seen that the World Bank, for example, they announced that they will suspend their aid to Sudan, though Sudan managed to get access to billions of dollars for the first time in 30 years. Also, the US announced that it will suspend like $700 million. Also, the African Union announced that it will suspend the activities of Sudan until the civilian government is reinstated. So Saudi Arabia is trying to to find a solution through dialogue in order to we have to curb the negative economic consequences that will Sudan face in the upcoming period.
Amira, let's talk a little bit about Qatar. It's been reported that Sudan has recalled its ambassador to Qatar. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, actually, Sudan, around 6 ambassadors have been sacked, including Qatar, US, China, and the EU also representative. On the other hand, as I mentioned, that Saudi Arabia, it was in close ties with Sudan. On the other hand, we have seen that there has been a tension between Qatar and Sudan even before the power sharing agreement, because Qatar was supporting the Muslim Brotherhood in Sudan, who were supported by the long-time ruler Omar al-Bashir. though after the power sharing agreement, though Qatar tried to restore the diplomatic ties with Sudan and maintain like diplomatic ties with this country. For example, Qatar sent a congratulatory letter to Al Burhan, but there is still like we can say the ties were not like normal, and this also has been crystal clear because earlier also the Sudanese ambassador was recalled from the Qatari ambassador was recalled from Sudan. So we have seen there is a difference between the approach of Saudi Arabia and its ties with Sudan, and also Qatar ties with Sudan. And if we highlight the press release that was issued by Qatar Foreign Affairs Ministry, they said that they are following up with like concern the recent developments in Sudan. And last September, when there was another attempt, military coup attempt that was foiled, Qatar was against such military coup. So now definitely Al Burhan, he has like a certain stance against Qatar because Qatar previously condemned the attempt of military coup. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Amira. Amira Syed, political analyst at the Egyptian Gazette, which is based in Cairo. Well, the African Union is suspending Sudan's membership until the civilian government is restored. We heard Amira speak about that in the previous report. Koleto Wanjohi has more from Addis Ababa.
Well, the African Union Peace and Security Council held an emergency meeting and decided that the African Union will support the civilians in Sudan and support a civilian-led transitional period. And by that, it means that Sudan now will not be able to participate in any activities of the African Union meetings and any other practical activities. But apart from that, the AU is not leaving Sudan alone. It has said that it will send a mission. The AU Peace and Security Council will go to Sudan to try and speak to the stakeholders to see if they can go back to the transitional rule, as well as it has instructed the AU Commission chairperson to intensify his talks and association with the stakeholders to see if this can happen. And also, it has asked him to send his emissary. Let's remember that the AU appointed a special envoy for the Horn of Africa, who's the former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, whose focus was a bit on Ethiopia, but now he might have to expand that and take in Sudan.
Well, the Horn of Africa is in turbulence. As we've been reporting, several armed conflicts and political crises are currently going on in different countries in the sub-region, threatening to destabilize it, from the recent military coup in Sudan to the civil war in Ethiopia, the political crisis in Somalia, and the stalled peace process in South Sudan. The conflicts have caused untold death and misery over the past few years. Well, for more on that, we're not joined by Victor Cohen, the African Youth Initiative Network based in Kampala, Uganda, to discuss this further. Victor, thank you so much for joining us in Africa Live. What issues are fueling instability in the Horn of Africa?
Well, thank you so much. It is true that when you look through the Horn of Africa, left or right, you see the suffering. There's been political turbulence over and again, and the region has been in the consistent crisis of humanitarian needs and pressure. And we see that also the region where majority of the population are under pressure for change, either positive change or violent change. I think the biggest cause of this instability in the region is one driving factor, which I know for sure is the ethnic supremacy role. There's a lot of ethnicization of politics of the region, where it's identity-based politics. Majority of these countries in the region have gotten into a crisis of unaddressed historical injustices based on identities that has been for long been underlooked, in a way that people have not been able to come to a coherent condition where we promote national cohesion, peace, and stability. It's been politics of tribalism, politics of identity, politics of ethnicity. So you find that whether you look at it in Somalia, whether you look at it in Ethiopia or Sudan, and even all these neighboring regions, there's going to be more crisis along the way, because one, we have not been able to address the tribal question. We have not been able to dissect the ethnic dilemma in the regional democracy. But that's where it has been very prominent. And then another challenge is I see that's also the generational mistrust. there's been over the time the growing mistrust between the younger and older generation when it comes to political leadership. And the young people who have been born in war, grew up in suffering, and they have never had an opportunity to breathe. So in a way, a majority of this population are yearning for when will the real change come so that they become part of it. And of course, the other last most important thing is, which has not been addressed also for long, is the external power. What we see what's going in Sudan and also in Somalia, in Ethiopia and all that, there's so much external power that is putting pressure on the local. But the big question is, won't we have another Afghanistan in the Horn of Africa? And the question would be, which country would be the next Afghanistan in the Horn of Africa? What we saw in Afghanistan probably has inspired more of what we're seeing right now.
Victor, the issues that you mentioned sound very, very deep-rooted. What kind of intervention do you believe the region needs to save lives and also to just ensure that people can get out of this the situation, the crises that we continue to see?
What I know for sure right now, the region as it is, there's too much movement, cross-border movement, back and forth. People are running for safety. People are moving from one country to another country, crossing borders. But the challenge that has not been properly handled has been a political question. We have not been able to have like a regional platform which is promoting an effort geared toward peaceful resolutions of conflict. There's been many intellectual, academic analysis and report that has highlighted the plights of the communities, but the plights of the population, and it has always predicted what would come if nothing is done. But not so much has been put into actions. There's so much talk about what should be done in the region, but very little has been done to engage meaningfully. 2 years ago, I engaged in the continental study on the role of youth in peace and security, and I was working for Eastern Horn of Africa. I could hear, I could feel the pain that the majority of the young population feel. And it has become an incident where after every 15 to 10 years, of 10 to 15 or 20 years, there's mass atrocities in the region. Reasons being generation grows in pain, they survive pain, and they continue to look for change in pain. The big issue is we have been only trying to address pain with pain, which has been a problem in the region. The young people need to be brought on board meaningfully. Politicians need to understand the need to go beyond tribal identity-based politics. And then we also need to address the economic pressure that is causing all this mass migration across the region. If you move around the world, majority of the refugees around the world come from Eastern Horn of Africa. Why are we the leading exporters of refugees all over the world? It's because we have failed to address our questions at home. So we need to engage Africans, the young people, majority being the young who are the victims, should be brought on board as change makers. They're the game changers, but they need to be engaged meaningfully. Not only should we put them in the front line, let's bring them to the dialogue and engage in mediation processes.
Victor, thank you so much for your insights and sharing your experience and knowledge with us. Victor Cohen, Director at the African Youth Initiative Network based in Kampala, Uganda. Well, UN Peacekeeping Chief Jean-Pierre Lacroix has praised the warming relations between South Sudan and its neighbor, Sudan. In his video link address to Security Council, Lacroix said that it was encouraging that South Sudan and Sudan had now established national committees in the territory of Abyei. The oil-rich region claimed by both Sudan and South Sudan had been hotly contested. Lacroix also noted that the implementation of its UN mandate over the past reporting period had also been successful. UNISFA has continued its work to protect over 100,000 vulnerable people of Abyei and support intercommunal dialogue.
The review team did identify a significant trust deficit that remains between the communities in Abyei, particularly the Miseria and Ngokbenka, and noted an important space for UN peacebuilding, humanitarian recovery, and development assistance. The UN continues to prioritize support for this issue, and it is my hope that the Council will provide UNISFA with a continued and somewhat strengthened mandate in this particular area, while slowly but steadily identifying areas where the military and security side of the mission could start preparing for an eventual drawdown.
Despite lingering disagreements between the governments of Sudan and South Sudan on a number of outstanding matters, including over the final status of Abyei, the intensification of high-level contact between the two countries, and the complementarity of their mediation efforts in resolving their respective internal conflicts augur well for their long-term peaceful coexistence. It is crucial for both countries to preserve and build on the progress achieved so far and to resolve the conflict in the Blue Nile and South Kordofan states. As they do so, the international community should in turn redouble efforts in enabling them to achieve their noble goals. Given the increasingly tense regional environment, I hope that the current developments in Sudan will not reverse the commendable achievements already made.
Mali's transitional government is given the special representative from West Africa's main regional bloc 72 hours to leave the country. According to Foreign Ministry, the special representative has been engaging with groups undertaking actions deemed to be hostile to transition and are not in line with his mission. The Economic Community of West African States, also known as ECOWAS, has been pressing Mali to respect its commitments to have presidential and legislative elections next year. Mali's interim authorities have pushed back, saying that they would confirm a date for elections early after national consultations in December. Well, CGTN's Phil Ehaza is in Abuja, and he's been following this story for us. Hi, Phil. What is the latest on Mali's expulsion of the ECOWAS envoy from the country?
Thanks, Hannah. Well, it's been a lot of back and forth, going to the headquarters of the ECOWAS Commission here in Abuja to try to get some kind of response from them, but it's been futile all the same. We've also been monitoring the media and information desks for information, responses, reactions from this latest development, maybe a press briefing and all of that, but it's not been coming forth. But we've spoken to quite a number of analysts, political analysts, and some of them are saying that the focus for ECOWAS at the moment will be to continue the mediation in Mali and to intensify its efforts to ensure that the February 27th date for the first round of general elections will be kept sacrosanct by the current military government there. So whether or not the special envoy has been given a ban to leave the country, analysts are saying that that may not be the main focus for ECOWAS. The focus here will be ensuring that pressure continues to mount for the military government to keep that date sacrosanct, start or commit to that date. Don't forget that barely a week before this latest development, a special delegation led by the chair of the ECOWAS and the president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, actually visited Mali to also pressure the government to accept the date to also start plans and preparations for the election. So that actually is the focus, but we are also monitoring to see what next move the ECOWAS will give as regards Mali and, of course, returning to the constitutional rule.
Phil, while that might be the focus, how is the regional body ECOWAS reacting to this expulsion of its envoy?
Well, so like I said, right now the ECOWAS is not making known its reactions to the developments in Mali. But of course, we know that the ECOWAS, one of its key focuses in Mali is to ensure that the country returns to constitutional rule. Also, if you recall, this same military government actually, ousted, the transitional government that was in place to ensure that the elections hold. That occurred in August. So that's, if you call it, that's a double coup by the military government, and so that's the reason why there's a lot of pressure. There may be some kind of distrust to from this current military government to see if they can really go by the plans to ensure that elections hold in February to return the country to democratic rule. But again, of course, we'll be either seeing things like a replacement for a mediator to get back to Mali and bring them back to the plans, to also see the possibility possible reasons why this special envoy was given that ban. There were some accusations, of course, of that Hamidou Boli supporting or having some kind of affinity for the previous administration that was ousted, led by IBM Keita, that's Ibrahim Boubacar Keita. And so, but all of those allegations and investigations, I would expect, is ongoing by the ECOWAS Commission. But like we said earlier, they have not made those plans known. But of course, we are monitoring to see more reactions, more moves as to bringing Mali back into the democratic rule.
Phil, thank you so much for all that. We know that we'll continue to hear from you as this story continues to unfold. Well, China has welcomed Equatorial Guinea to join the Global Development Initiative. Chinese President Xi Jinping had a phone conversation with Equatorial Guinean President Teodoro Obiang Nguema. Xi said his country stood ready to work with Equatorial Guinea and other African countries to promote sustainable and common development of developing countries. She noted that in recent years, China-Equatorial Guinea relations had maintained a high level of development. China says it will continue to provide vaccine assistance for Equatorial Guinea's fight against COVID-19 and will deepen bilateral ties in health and cooperation in various fields within the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative. Well, China has welcomed Equatorial Guinea's decision to join the Global Development Initiative, also known as the GDI. In a phone conversation with Equatorial Guinea's President Teodoro Obiang Nguema, Chinese President said that China stood ready to work with Equatorial Guinea. Well, let's just continue with that story. We're now joined by Ovigwe Ogwego, a policy analyst at Development Reimagine, who's based in Abuja. Thank you so much for joining us, Ovigwe. How significant is Equatorial Guinea's membership of the Global Development Initiative?
Sorry, come again, I didn't hear that.
I was saying thank you so much for joining us on the program, Ovigwe. I was just speaking about, I wanted you to just touch on the significance of Equatorial Guinea's membership of the Global Development Initiative.
Oh yeah, it's a good start. I think for such an initiative, developing countries present an opportunity, Equatorial Guinea in particular. So for Equatorial Guinea becoming part of the GDI, I believe it will set the ball rolling and inspire other African countries to sign on, because at such an early stage, it's crucial that African countries are at the table, having these conversations around strengthening policy coordination, to realize their development agendas.
Well, how is China and Equatorial Guinea's bilateral cooperation in all fields faring, especially in the fight against COVID-19 and also the Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, if you recall, in 2020, in February in particular, Equatorial Guinea donated $2 million to China. That was the time when China was in the middle of combating the pandemic, at home. And then fast forward to February of this year, 100 doses of, China donated Sinopharm vaccines arrived, in Equatorial Guinea, which was a very big step forward, because it made Equatorial Guinea the first African country to receive COVID-19 vaccine aid from China. So, and if you look going forward again, I think in June, Equatorial Guinea bought another 500,000 doses, of a Sinovac vaccine. And looking at how much that has meant for Equatorial Guinea, as it stands now, as of September 2021, Equatorial Guinea has fully vaccinated 28% of the target population, which is something remarkable in the continent where overall we're looking at 5%. So looking at how both aid and its ability to purchase these vaccines from China has really been very crucial to achieve that relatively satisfactory vaccination rate. So it's very important. And even within the period since COVID-19, also there will also be a lot of other assistance. If you recall, there was an explosion in Bata in March of this year, that was very devastating in Equatorial Guinea. But we also saw that China sent a medical mission, to assist Equatorial Guinea in recovery from that devastating explosion. There were Chinese doctors on the ground, and also they donated medical supplies. So in terms of COVID-19 cooperation, it has been strong. In terms of other issues that Equatorial Guinea has faced, like the explosion I just mentioned, there was also Chinese support, and that is because there's a good relationship between both sides. On the BRI, there's a lot of opportunities for Equatorial Guinea in terms of infrastructure financing and how to improve trade and ties with China. So I'm hoping that with Equatorial Guinea within the GDI can raise its propositions on how to improve economic revitalization and all of these tenets that we're seeing the GDI really present. So both the BRI and the GDI having a lot of cooperation on that front.
Abyei, thank you so much for all that. Abyei Ogwego, a policy analyst at Development Reimagine, and he's based in Abuja. Well, China has welcomed Equatorial Guinea to join the Global Development Initiative. Chinese President Xi Jinping had a phone conversation with Equatorial Guinean President Teodoro Obiang Nguema. She said his country stood ready to work with Equatorial Guinea and other African countries to promote sustainable and common development of developing countries. She noted that in recent years, China-Equatorial Guinea relations have maintained a high level of development. China says it will continue to provide vaccine assistance for Equatorial Guinea's fight against the COVID-19 pandemic and will deepen bilateral ties in health and cooperation in various fields within the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Well, the relationship between the People's Republic of China and Equatorial Guinea has been on an upward trajectory, and the two leaders have promised to ensure the trend continues. According to President Xi, China appreciates Equatorial Guinea's support on Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and human rights issues. In return, China has promised to support Equatorial Guinea in safeguarding its national sovereignty while exploring a development path that suits its own national realities. China's relationship with the West African country has become more profound during the battle against COVID-19. The global powerhouse has continued to support Equatorial Guinea's vaccination program, donating Chinese vaccine Sinopharm to the African country. At the beginning of the pandemic, China sent medical teams and technical support to Equatorial Guinea and many other African states. This included the provision of personal protective gears. President Teodoro Obiang Nguema lauded China for being a friend of Africa during these challenging times. Indeed, the friendship between China and the African continent has been growing. President Xi says strengthening unity, coordination, and mutual support in safeguarding international fairness and justice as the common interests of developing countries should be a common goal between China and Equatorial Guinea. The West African country has agreed to actively take part in the Belt and Road Initiative and the Global Development Initiative. President Obiang Nguema promised to work with China to boost cooperation in all areas. He said this country, or his country, has always seen China as an important strategic partner and will always abide by the One China policy, support China's stance on issues concerning its core interests, and safeguard multilateralism. Diplomatic ties between China and Equatorial Guinea were established 50 years ago and have been getting better and better over the years. The relationship has seen China support quite a number of development projects in the African country. In 2018, China constructed a regulating reservoir at the Jibloho hydropower plant with an aim of enhancing development in Equatorial Guinea through the provision of clean energy for all, especially in rural areas. Back to you.
Let's take a short break and return more on Africa Live.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, food prices in Ghana have steadily increased since the beginning of this year. It has raised concerns among consumers about its impact on the cost of living. The government plans to reduce taxes on petroleum products from next month to cushion consumers, but analysts want more to be done to stabilize the price of fuel. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rafai reports from Accra.
Fuel prices have gone up 42% in Ghana since October last year. Motorists say they can no longer keep up.
I now pay almost twice the amount I used to pay to fill my fuel tank. It's difficult to make a profit when I drive this taxi.
The hike in fuel prices is just too much this year. I am unable to even repair my car when it gets faulty because I don't make enough money as a commercial driver due to the high cost of fuel.
The increases in fuel prices are mainly linked to changes on global markets, but it is already feeding through to inflation in other sectors of Ghana's economy.
Food prices have begun to shoot up, as well as the cost of goods and services.
The government has scrapped some taxes on petroleum products to cushion consumers. It has removed the price stabilization and recovery levy of 16 pesos per litre of petrol and 14 pesos per litre of diesel. While it will take effect from November, some analysts say it is not sustainable.
We are looking at how governments can ensure that the monies that have been recouped from the price stabilization recovery levy for the purposes of buying strategic stock. In the long term, we can be looking at how we can beef up or increase our refining capacity.
Motorists agree a more sustainable way to stabilize the price of fuel is needed. They also want other taxes on petroleum products scrapped. For now, though, they are concerned the price of fuel may reach an all-time high by the end of the year. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
A threatening letter that forced an Egypt airplane bound for Moscow to return to Cairo was a hoax. This is according to officials investigating the document that was left on board flight MS-728. They, however, did not disclose the content of the message. The aircraft was forced back to the Egyptian capital only 22 minutes after taking off on Wednesday. Another plane took off in its place with 93 passengers. Flights between Moscow and Cairo resumed in April 2018 after being suspended for 2.5 years following a terrorist attack. Well, let's not get into the day's sports news. Let's start with cricket, where Namibia notched their first ever win in the main draw of a top-level tournament on Wednesday with a 4-wicket victory over Scotland at the T20 World Cup in Abu Dhabi. The tense match got underway in dramatic fashion with Ruben Truppelmann bagging 3 Scottish wickets in the very first over. Soon after, it was 18-4 on the scoreboard, but a 27-ball 44 from Michael Lear